Okay, so I think we'll get started. You can introduce yourself, waiting on other people to join into the presentation, but just want to give everybody on the call an introduction to what we're doing with these sessions. I call this the Topics in the Field of System Science, and it's a monthly series that highlights what's going on in the world in people using system science to make a difference. And there is a lot of good work going on, and I just want to be able to highlight that, and we can all learn from that. You can find all the previous sessions on my YouTube channel, which I'll post in the chat box, a link after we get started. And then next year, we're going to be expanding these series through a collaboration to a new company that I'm launching, Systemic Excellence Group, and also the College collaboration with Peter Tuttingham, and expand, some of the quality of what we're doing. And then today, I'm once again excited to introduce Rajneesh Chowdhury. I'm going to have to practice that before the presentation next time. Sorry,
it's Chowdhury.
I just butchered
Sorry for a
that.
complicated name. Chowdhury.
Anyway, so Rajneesh was with us last July and did an excellent presentation on just the basics of system science. And today he's going to expand on that and share some of the work he's involved with, which is very exciting. So I want to ask everybody to use the chat box actively, put in where you're from, introduce yourself, some of your interests, questions you might have for Rajneesh, and then also any references you think of that the group may want to capture. And then we'll have access to the chat box notes afterwards. So Rajneesh, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you get started.
Sure. Thank you very much, Diana. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon from whichever part of the world we are joining today. Thanks, Full Spectrum Solutions, for giving me the opportunity to talk and present to this highly capable and well-read audience for the second time within 6 months. To introduce myself, I am a management consultant. I've been working in the field of management consulting for the last 16 years, specifically in India, and I'm based out of India. A lot of my work was based out of the UK in the past, and also the US and Canada, and some parts in Japan. And I've had the privilege to study systems thinking formally as a second master's at the University of Hull way back in 2002 to 2003. So as Diana mentioned, in July, when I did the webinar, I talked about system science in detail and extended it to the use of soft systems methodology and strategic assumption surfacing and testing in the healthcare sector in the UK. Today's presentation would focus more on HR consulting with a focus on organizational development, or OD, and my interest of blending systems thinking and organizational development. I'm going to talk a bit about systems thinking and flexibility for about 5 minutes to begin with. I'm going to then introduce something that I call the systemic OD matrix that I developed as a result of my research over the last several years that I published recently. And finally, I'm going to talk about a case study where the systemic OD matrix, for which the systemic OD matrix can be used as a reference for understanding systems thinking and OD. And we'll be happy to welcome your critique, discussions at the end of the presentation. So going forward, just a quick recap on the difference between reductionist approach and a systems approach, which are two fundamentally different ways of problem solving. May I request everyone to be on mute, please? There's a lot of disturbance from somewhere. Thank you. Thank you very much. So reductionist approach, as we all know, has a tendency to break down larger systems into smaller parts and try to understand the cogs in the wheel. It's always the mind and the matter dualism, which is also there all the time. So it doesn't look at the whole, which is rather the approach of the systems thinking mindset, which looks at interrelationships, that looks at boundaries of where do we draw the boundary of a system, which is very difficult, as we will discuss more today, And finally, the emergent properties. And my favorite example from complexity science, which I used the last time as well, is a bird flock. When you study a bird flock, or when you observe a bird flock, which takes its own patterns and own shapes and own movements, it's simply impossible to understand it by breaking down into individual birds. It's about how the flock behaves and how it emerges. And that is what we say the whole is more than the sum of its parts, which is systems thinking, really. I identify myself from a particular strand of systems thinking, which is critical systems thinking, which was developed at the University of Hull by people like Professor Mike Jackson and also Gerald Midgley, over research spanning over 30 years. And there are three commitments to critical systems thinking, and these are important because I make reference to these three commitments all the time when I refer to my work and my case studies and my way of thinking. One is critical awareness, which is about constantly being self-aware of your value judgments, which influences you to draw your boundaries. Now, it's easy to say that it's important to be self-aware, but it's very difficult because we're talking about values. Self-awareness comes from the kind of value systems that we hold, and it also helps us or influences us in defining the system and drawing the boundaries of where and how we are supposed to put limits of the system in itself. Pluralism is a second commitment, which is avoidance of using one methodology or one state of mind. It's really the ability to bring together different tools, different techniques, hard and soft systems thinking together in a mix and match approach, qualitative and quantitative, so that you're able to have the maximum impact, the best understanding of the field. And finally, by doing all of this, we are trying to seek improvement in the situation. And more importantly, improvement is a tool of human emancipation. How can we really use systems thinking to help people, to empower people and to make them successful as much as the organization or the consultant when we get into a field? In critical systems thinking, it's very obvious that flexibility, it is important. And I define flexibility as the ability to stay nimble and adaptive at the wake of changing situations, or being able to reinvent oneself in thought and action within the same situation. It is the ability to be comfortable with change, to seamlessly think and apply with great variety, to be agile, and to appreciate and absorb unforeseen circumstances without creating shock for the system. Openness and freedom to choose are aspects that characterize flexibility. The orange words are important because we constantly talk about a VUCA environment that we live in today. But how as a management consultant are we able to navigate that atmosphere? Are some of the cues that I've tried to provide with the orange words and the definition of flexibility that I've provided. So again, hard skills and soft skills, bringing them together in partnership becomes very important, and specifically in organizational development. The skills include open-mindedness, empathy, listening, influencing, negotiating, brokering, because we are talking about dealing with a client who has either called you in to reduce the number of workforce or to bring about a drastic change or to enter into a new market that influences and touches people who work within the system. So a combination of both hard and soft skills become important in using systems thinking for organization development. With that background of systems thinking and critical systems thinking, why do I feel that systems mindset is extremely critical for organization development? In fact, there is no two way about it. An OD consultant has to be a systems consultant. And I say that OD is a systemic discipline, and this is how I have defined OD in my recent book, as a systemic discipline that brings together diverse functions in an organization with a consideration set of external factors to design, implement, and sustain business-focused interventions with people at its center. So we are normally called in to intervene with people to create a business impact. So that's the pressure as an OD consultant we normally operate under. And both internal and external influences are needed to be taken into account. And therefore, OD has to be a system and discipline. And as I said, there are no two ways about it. So OD is a response to an internal or an external trigger. It always has an executive sponsorship because it is always so strategic. It addresses both hard and soft dimensions within an organization, soft including your culture and vision, and hard dimensions including your processes, procedures, systems, and OD has to be multidisciplinary. And it is always implementation or action oriented, and OD has to be participative. So these are some of the tenets of organizational development. And if you look at this list, there is no way but to adopt a systems approach as an OD consultant. Again, I made reference to flexibilities, but what are the flexibilities to keep in mind as an OD consultant? It has to do with leadership flexibility, flexibility in strategy, people, the kind of partnerships you're getting in, the products, process, the people results and society results. And society results are very important because now we're talking about sustainability, the environment, governance all the time. In fact, these dimensions of flexibility in organization development was introduced by Gupta and Nagpal in 2015 in their paper when they talk about next generation business excellence model. And they say that the first bullet points are really enablers to help you attain results of customer, people, and society. So if you, as an OD consultant, we look at the first set of bullet points as enablers to give results which are amenable to your customer, to people in society, and eventually the revenue of your client. Might be easy to say that, but as an OD consultant, I say that we work under a lot of constraints. Because number one, the defined and rather simplistic constraint of a project mandate. Very often we are called in saying that, okay, we have 200 people in a corporate office, but we think that we can operate with 150 people. Can you help us downsize? Or sometimes we get in with a request that, we think people are leaving because our pay structures are not competitive. Can you do a pay benchmarking and, advise us on a new compensation structure for the organization? But the point is, it might be culture for which people are leaving. It's not just for the pay. And also the compensation is also dependent on the culture and the strategy that you have as an organization. But when we sign off the contracts, it's very simplistic and very rigid at times. And I have confessed in my recent book that often our pressure for revenue, for utilization of workforce, for competition in a market is so high that we don't have choices but to sign up to mandates very often, which may be very simplistic and rigid. So my question is, are we responsible enough as a consultant? Second, consultants can be caught up in turf wars between different leaders and functions in a client context. There might be 2, 3 very senior people involved. One might be a sponsor. One might be, somebody who's championing the project. And very often we come across situations where a recommendation or a finding of a research goes against the principal sponsor of the project itself. What do you do then? And finally, ethical boundaries are what I think encompasses points 1 and 2 as well. Given the tenets of OD to be contextual, well, situational, and we have talked about it, it has to be multidisciplinary, participative, iterative, and long-term. And for that, systems thinking and a systems mindset, and more importantly, critical systems mindset needs to come into the play, because I have repeatedly made reference to ethics. I've repeatedly made reference to how do we empower people and break out of rigidity as a critical systems thinking consultant. Out of a lot of my research and a lot of my project, I came up with what I call the systemic OD matrix, where in the y-axis, if I look at the components that we normally and very commonly get into client situation, and I borrow these 4 components from Levitt's work, which Levitt came out about 15 years ago. So the first component is task. How do you go and fix specific tasks within an organization, roles within an organization, which is a more simplistic way of looking at organization development. Second, structure. The organization might move from, let's say, a product-focused organization to a more innovation-focused organization. So therefore, your structure automatically needs to change. So OD consultants can be called in saying, we need to restructure or create a new structure. Third is technology. What kind of technology enables HR more seamless within an organization? Can performance management system be automated, for example, is another ask from a client side. And finally, people. They say that, how can we build competencies within people? Can you help us develop a competency framework and, render executive coaching with our people? So that's the Y dimension, Y axis I look at. However, when I was doing research and reflecting on my own work, I came up myself with what I call the dimensions of organization development. And the first dimension is alignment. And alignment is about, as an organization grows, you become, your vision, your mission, your value systems become more and more diluted because you attract people from a lot of different kind of cultures, backgrounds, different organizations. So how do you make sure that people are aligned to yourself? So therefore, you have to articulate the right vision, the right culture, the right organization structure, the right pay mechanism, so that everything is aligned to the ultimate business vision. So if you look at within alignment, your structure, your people, your culture get encompassed. So it's more holistic. The second dimension is accountability. Once you create the right culture, articulate the right structure, how do you build in accountability? Through performance management system, by reward and recognition, by putting in benchmark pay systems within the organization. Again, so therefore I call it more a dimension because a lot of the horizontals get subsumed within accountability. And finally, I said development. You are aligned, you have set up accountability matrices, but finally, how do you make sure that you develop people so they are accountable in the long run and they remain aligned? And development is about setting up your development centers, making sure where you stand, putting people through development cycles, putting them through coaching and mentoring, constant review between peers, 360-degree feedback, or between managers and subordinates. So a lot of these aspects come in to develop people in the right way so that your alignment is achieved and accountability is achieved with people. What I saw was that as I was doing organization development consulting, I tried to understand the intersections between each of these boxes. And I will not get into each of this box because it might take a long time. But what I have done is that I have articulated the dangers of the focus of one particular box. So what are the advantages? So if I look at alignment and task, it means that as an OD consultant, I might be focused on task articulation, and definition takes center stage, right? What is my job description? What is my role clarity? What is the KRA? That is what I mean by definition. And in italics, I talk about a danger. It's a danger of over documentation. Similarly, alignment and structure can have advantage of roles and reporting, but danger on over reliance on structure, right? Similarly, I'm going to leave it on the screen for maybe 2 minutes for you to take a look at where I've articulated first what it really means, and in italics, what could be the disadvantage of that particular box. So if you look at development and people, the bottom right, it's great, right? You're focused on people and you're focused on development. You're authentically committed to improving people as human beings on their capability. But performance might actually take a backseat. So my messaging here is that no box is right or wrong. It's as an OD consultant, how do we bring about a balance of this? And when I present my case study, I'll try and say how a particular mandate was presented to us as a consultant, which was more focused on alignment and task, and how we really managed to shift it to touch it into different cells within the systemic OD matrix. So I'll move on in a few seconds from here, unless there are any severe disagreements on this.
So do you want to take a couple questions right now, Rajneesh?
Sure. Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. I haven't seen any questions in the chat box. Does anybody have a question for Rajneesh at this point? Okay.
I do. I put one in the chat box.
I missed it. Sorry, Marty.
So, Rajneesh, I'm really curious to know. You mentioned that you you often come, clients are coming to you with sort of a mandate, like, here's what I want you to do. So how do you respond to a client when, I mean, usually OD consultants, we're pretty good at looking at it and saying, yeah, it's not really what's going to resolve this issue. And so how do you respond to them when they come with this proposed solution and it's really clear that it's only addressing symptoms and not really looking at root causes?
Great, Marty. Thank you very much. I think you've made my job easier because that's exactly what I'm going to present in the case study from the next slide onwards.
Okay.
So just a few more minutes, and I hope to answer your question as we go along. And if I still manage not to answer, let's discuss it again at the end of my case study. Yep. So let's move forward. So this is a case study which is based in India, in the western city of Mumbai, which I'm sure all of you have heard of. And for the sake of anonymity of the client, I've called them potential steals. Potential steals is a major steel, hot rolling coal steel production company. So they used to produce at the time of this study, which was about seven years ago, about 1 million tons of hot rolled steels every year. Export was the major focus. They used to export to over 30 countries across the world, which was about 80% of their business. Very high on quality focus. It was a listed company, but the family had a huge, the promoter family had a huge influence over it. So it was a very traditional promoter-driven company, although it was a listed company. So a lot of the people in the senior management and the shop floor workers had worked in the company over long periods of time. So tenure was very high. So very stable, old-fashioned, if I might say, manufacturing kind of a company. So we were called in when a couple of things were happening. One, the promoters realized that, yes, the business is good. They were growing rapidly. The quality was good. But however, for a long-term focus, they really need to focus on change the focus from production and margins to innovation. Because if you have to stay competitive in the long run, you have to innovate new products and not be looked at just as a trade company, but more as an original equipment manufacturing, as an OEM company, which has its own brand. That is one. Second, although there were, as I said, the tenure was pretty long and people were stable, that was also beginning to create a problem for the company. They felt that a lot of people were not performing and staying back over a long period of time. And they were not leaving because the work was easy. They had no fear of getting fired because they had had a personal bond with the promoter family and the top management. And this symptom was also there in a lot of senior people, managerial and senior level officials within the organization, that they were just staying in the organization without being able to perform much. And third, technology integration was in a rapid pace, during which we were called in. They were implementing SAP because they realized that technology enablement would really help them in streamlining the processes, right from order taking from the marketing team to the coordination team to production to final delivery of the client, and including customer feedback and resolution of any complaints after the deliveries are made. So this is a bit about the background of the company. We were called in specifically to look at the sales and marketing department, because the problem was that they felt that they had a good name. The company, Potential Steels, had a good name in the market. So what are the sales and marketing team doing? They had 76 people in the sales and marketing team, and the promoter and the CEO called us and said that we think that we don't even need such a large team because our customers are stable. They're coming back again and again over the years. and they're increasing our order booking every year. So what are these 76 people doing? The simple mandate that they had for us was, can you come and downsize? Was a very simple mandate, Marty, to your, it was a symptom, and in all good faith, they noticed it, and to a large extent, it could have been true as well. Um, so the way we framed it was that the alignment had to move from product focused team to a more customer focused team, which meant that the promoter and the CEO told us that right now the sales and marketing team and also the rest of the teams, including manufacturing, were really focused on production, but how do we lead them to understand customers? Because currently the sales and marketing team would go to a customer, take the order and come back. But are you really focused on the customer? Are you focused on satisfaction or even customer delight? So currently they were not doing all of that work which they were supposed to do as a sales and marketing team. Second, there was a lack of clarity. They were definitely overstaffed. There was a lot of replication and duplication of work. So our mandate was bring about clarity, right size, and streamline the function. The transformation that they were seeking was accelerating the speed of business, becoming a quality focused and customer focused responsive organization, building ownership, clarity, and a culture of performance, right? That was the underlying theme, but interestingly, that whole sentence about transformation was not being articulated by the client. What we were told was that, can we make it a customer focused team from being a product focused team? We are heavily overstaffed. Can you cut down numbers by at least 30 to 40%? So that was the symptom that was being thrown at us as OD consultants. As we went in, this was the entire framework for consulting that we used. And, you know, I would not take credit for the entire program. We were a 4-member team. There was one project lead that I was handling the project manager role. And there were 2 individual consultants who were working with us at that point of time, purely from a data collection point of view, because this kind of a project included a lot of research on time analysis of white collar workers as well. So we started by doing an as-is appreciation, the top left, which is understanding the overall process and the value chain of the entire end-to-end from order booking to order delivery. The value contribution by unique role holders. So although there were 76 people in the team, we mapped unique roles within it. And unique roles are roles which are specifically doing one kind of work. And these were done by interviewing 3 to 4 people of every individual role. And we identified 24 unique roles. Time investment in various work categories. And work categories, I'm going to discuss it later. We divided them into, strategic, operational, and transactional roles. And finally, we identified bottlenecks and improvement opportunities as we went along doing the entire study. Based on that, we understood the business value proposition, which is alignment to your value chain and strategy, the transformation, the leverage of technology that was happening right now. And at the same time, it was important for us not to ignore people. So the feasibility and the employer promise that they have, the enhanced technical acumen that has to be brought in, the customer relationship capability of the sales and marketing team that had to be brought in as well. So in a way, we were creating a new organization, as I say, for the sales and marketing team of Potential Steeds. And what I have on the circles on the left-hand side, which is aspired value creation, alignment with business, best practices, and employment relations, as some of the drivers based on which the to-be recommendations were made to make Potential Steels a truly innovation-driven and customer-focused organization in the long run. So we wanted, and we really had a very inclusive consultative approach, because right from the beginning, we knew that yes, cutting down workforce numbers was a mandate, changing from a product to an innovation-focused or a new product development-focused organization is a mandate. But how is it that we really rescue this project from remaining just a CEO's ask to look at people, look at what customers are saying, look at what the SAP implementation team is saying, and bring in a variety of perspective to unravel the real causes rather than treating the symptoms. We started off interviewing customers, because ultimately it was We had to create a customer-driven organization. And we heard similar stories from the customer, that the sales and marketing team was, yes, extremely responsive, but to the point till which they were booking orders. There was no new information coming from the sales and marketing team. They were unaware of industry best practices, of what's happening in other industries, or in the steel industry in other countries, right? So they wanted more knowledge-based discussion rather than an order-based discussion from the sales and marketing team. They also felt that there was a big gap between the sales and marketing team and the manufacturing team, because the sales team would promise to a particular timeline, which the manufacturing team would fail to deliver the orders in, right? So they also felt that they were operating like two different departments within the same organization. We had immersive listening sessions with the employees across all levels, right from the vice president of sales and marketing to the managers, to all and when I say all, I meant the identification of 24 unique role holders. And for each role holder, we spoke to at least 2 to 3 people within the sales and marketing team. And what we heard was that there was a lack of training sessions, lack of learning opportunities, because they were there in the organization for a very long period of time. Their learning and development opportunities were being ignored or overlooked, or they were not even being asked about what more they need to be employees who could perform better as per external expectations. um, we studied production planning and inventory control. Now, this team came up repeatedly when we spoke to employees, when we spoke to the manufacturing team and the sales team. The PPIC team is like an intermediary between the sales team and the manufacturing team. They are supposed to do the entire planning. The moment the order booking happens from the sales team, how is the production planned? What kind of resources go into what kind of assembly line within the manufacturing? So they also control and coordinate for the inventory. And during the point when the study was going on, this would greatly be supported in the future. Hopefully, that's what the plan was, by the SAP implementation, the technology implementation. So the SAP team themselves came up as a very important team. Now here we had some very concerning stories that came up from the SAP implementation consultants, which was again from a tech team, which was an external consultant. They had 2 very interesting observations. Number one, the implementation rate within potential steals for SAP was one of the fastest that they ever had, which is great. But they also said that the management did not involve the people while design and customization of the SAP modules, right? So which was a big problem. So there was, as we were interviewing the employees, they were already surfacing a lot of resentment against the SAP implementation, because they were saying that during the pilot stages, the modules are being put in place which are not friendly to use. These are not what they want, and this is not going to help our problems. And what we heard from the SAP team was that it was purely a top management decision of what modules to be implemented, and this decision was taken without involving people. So obviously that was a serious issue coming up. And the simplistic approach also ensured that the technology implementation process itself was very fast but meaningless, right? So here what we did was that, again, referring back to Capra, we studied, our focus was more on study of patterns rather than structures, right? So if you look at it, we brought together as consultants voices of the customer, the employees, PPIC, the technology implementation team, and more importantly, tried to hear all these voices in context of what the original mandate was. One, cut down workforce, and 2, shift from product focus to innovation focus. But really bringing in different perspective helped us understanding patterns and relationships within the organization, rather than, and this was beyond the sales and marketing team as well. It's more organizational patterns that we uncovered beyond the structures and numbers and workforce time spent on different activities. If you look at this particular slide, I've tried to summarize the shift in focus. I think this is going to help us answer the question, Marty, that you posed. One was the shift from a transaction focus to a value focused, right? Initially, if we had focused only on workforce, we would have just studied time spent on various activities and administrative work. But now we need to focus on developmental strategic work. We realized that we have to move from close communication to transparency and openness, because if you look at the coordination between PPIC, sales team, and marketing team, involvement or not lack of involvement of the SAP team, there was clearly a problem with transparency. We needed a shift from task focused to people focused. Remember the systemic OD matrix that I presented earlier. We needed a shift from vertical thinking to horizontal thinking. Vertical thinking is where your department, you work within your department, but horizontal is more process-based thinking, right? And thinking as customer as the ultimate objective, and how do you bring in the entire organization together to really deliver to your customer value. And all this can be achieved through a symbiotic relationship between plant, logistics, and marketing. So the mandate really moved from restructuring and downsizing a marketing team to something which is more organizational and more systemic in nature. This is how we capture.
Rajneesh, I just want to interrupt for 1 second. I apologize. Sure. We have several questions, and I don't know where a natural place is for you to take questions, but I wanted to let you know that. So let us know when you're ready.
Okay, I would think if there are questions which are specific, if there is any doubt about the presentation or concept till now, we can address it now, or if it's more overall, we can keep it for the next 20 minutes.
Okay. Jean, did you want to ask your question? You said you had one for now.
On the particular slide that's in view,
okay,
I would take exception with the slide, and I would replace every one of the twos with and.
Right. Thank you for that. Yeah, very valid point, Jean. Completely agree. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And for the other questions, we'll go back to you when he finishes. Okay, go ahead.
Sure. So this is how I think Jean, you made a very important point, because the task and vertical thinking remain important, because if you look at this particular slide of how we captured information, there was no way we could have captured information with lateral thinking, right? There was some kind of reductionism happening here, because it has to happen hand in hand when you're addressing so many parameters of right sizing to capacity building to systemic change. So in people, we studied number of employees, behavioral competencies that were required, the technical competencies, alignment with strategic direction, and readiness for the future direction. We looked at processes, which is about documentation, alignment, service level agreements, performance metrics, and also effectiveness and efficiency measures. And finally, technology, if it was present, how efficient it was, and what was the level of user engagement through different technology modules in the company. And what we came up with was something like this. So on the x-axis, you see the complete value chain mapping of the sales and marketing department. And the red implies that these boxes or these competencies were completely non-existent. Green is, of course, it was in a very mature or satisfactory note. And surprise, surprise, if you look at people, the number of people were definitely very high. It's all green, the first row that you see. And of course, the yellow indicated that it was somewhere in the middle, which is partially existing or evolving. Technology interface was the poorest, so you see a lot of reds across the value chain of the sales and marketing team. What we now came up was, one was this reductionist knowledge that we had of what is happening and not happening in terms of time, people, process, and technology. We also thought, how do we bring in more value into the entire consulting arrangement, assignment? And that is where we came up with stratified systems theory of a requisite organization. Because to a large extent, yes, we could bring down workforce, we could realign, we could reposition, but how do we create an organization which where different levels are able to create different values. So a requisite organization is a systemic effort to rethink organization structure and leadership practices in terms of work complexity and human capability in order to enhance business alignment and effectiveness. I think the two words of work complexity and human capability becomes very important, because what stratified systems theory and RO credits to Elliot Jacks, what Elliot Jacks says is that the higher the complexity in an organization or any social system, the more capability you need to deal with it if you need to be adequately handling that complexity. And so Elliot Jacks talks about 7 dimensions of, um, of a requisite organization, of capability and complexity of an organization, right from the problems to the context to resources, the value that you're trying to add, the time horizon, that is the time in which your work would show a value, either positive or negative, the amount of collaboration that you are supposed to make, and discretion that you have in decision making. Now, what does this really mean in the whole scheme of stratified systems theory and RO and complexity? What it means that the higher up you go, the more complex your domain becomes. Taking an example of collaboration, at a shop floor level, which might be a level much junior, a lower level, your collaboration might be just with your workmates. But if you are a CEO of a large global company, your collaboration would be with your international peers, for example, for international environment groups if you're in a production and a manufacturing company. So your number of people, the kind of people you're collaborating with, increases automatically. Similarly, the kind of resources, and resources include your workforce, your financial resources, the technology resources that you have, completely undergoes a shift if you move from a junior to a super senior level. So imagine a shop floor worker and the CEO of a global manufacturing company, for example. So this is the whole concept of stratified systems theory and requisite organization. And going by requisite organization theory, there are 7 levels which are identified, right? Which is right from frontline staff to the CEOs of global enterprises. And what stratified systems theory says that at the lower level of level 1, 2, 3, you're adding value for the present, right? As you move up, you're adding value for the future. And ultimately, you're creating the value system. For example, today, look at Microsoft or Google, right? Yes, they are adding value for me and all of us for the present. Yes, they are adding value for the future. But in a way, they're really creating the whole technology ecosystem of the future. That's a value system. It's not just technology. There are values, there are ethical questions involved. There are questions around privacy, regulation, intercontinental data flow. So that's really creating a value system. It's not Google giving us a search platform. So that is how the complexity increases as you go up the ladder. So this was a quick introduction to levels of work. Again, going back to the more reductionist kind of analysis that we did, we tried and understand how within Potential Steel's the sales and marketing team, how the as-is time spent can be streamlined and made more value adding. And we made different recommendations in terms of deletion, outsourcing, or really delegation of work. Because what we observed in Potential Steels was, I'll move another slide, was that there was a lot of value compression happening. For example, the president marketing was supposed to be operating in more a higher strategy development kind of a role. But that person was actually, the value was compressed because the president marketing was operating at a more managerial role. Because I still remember his work was more doing approvals, running behind teams, getting their job done. So what was happening was that automatically the level of work of all of these unique roles, right from branch manager to exports head to head marketing to the president, everybody's value was being compressed. So they were not getting paid for what they were actually doing. They were getting paid much more for doing something of a much lesser value. If I'm a president marketing, I should be operating in a strategy deployment level, which is more, and a strategy creation level, which is more bringing in benchmarking, creating the strategy of more an innovation driven firm. But what was happening in potential steals was more, firefighting, more follow up, more of approvals, right? So this was what we uncovered using levels of work and a stratified systems theory. And we saw that there were the three areas of concern, three dimensions, which is alignment. The structure itself was therefore, lopsided, as we saw in the levels of work analysis. Effectiveness, because of technology or capability of people. The initial, problem I posed was that people were staying there without performing. So they were not probably doing the right things. And efficiency, things were getting really slowed down. So, time, delivery, and everything was becoming a problem. So these were three areas of concern that were coming up along with that. And our recommendation was more about how to move from low value adding to high value adding work, which automatically influenced the new structure that we had recommended for potential steals. And in this fuzzy slide, you see that we actually said that instead of 76 people, they could actually work with 50 people. But does it mean that you sack 26 people? Our answer was no. Our answer was there are two ways. Because they were an expanding firm, why don't we build capability of those 20 people and redeploy them within the growing business? If we're focusing on an export-focused business, if we're going on to become an innovation-focused and new product development business, why don't we build capability? So what we had done initially, if you would remember, and I alluded to it, was that during our immersive listening sessions, we asked all the stakeholders what kind of capabilities and competencies they were expecting from the people from a futuristic point of view. So we built something that we called a competency framework, and competencies are a combination of knowledge, skills, and attitudes that helps a professional to deliver on their job effectively and efficiently. And we identified competencies again within three dimensions of thought, action, and relation. Just to give an example, thought is more thinking related, obviously. It might be lateral thinking. It might be more flexibility, for example. Action is about how you're able to get the job done, right? Project management can be an example of an action competency. Relation is more about collaboration, leadership, negotiation becomes very important when you're in sales and marketing. So relation was again another bucket within which we identified the competencies. And what we did was that we said that continual learning needs to be the essence to the process, for which we introduced development centers. And development centers is a very OD specific methodology in which the incumbent population is taken through a half a day or a day long exercise, and they're made through gamified exercises to observe how people behave from a behavioral perspective, obviously, and really rate them on what the gaps are, what the opportunity areas are, and how they can be developed through training, coaching, on the job tasks as well as we go forward. So the focus really moved from downsizing to something that we call development and a long-term change for the organization. So, summarizing, streamlining of activities, incorporating best practices and capability building were some of the recommendations that we had for potential steals. As we did the project, we also brought in best practices from iron and steel companies, sales and marketing departments from across the world to influence our recommendations. So we really closed the entire exercise by an action planning workshop with the top team of potential steals. And of course, we had a laundry list of recommendations, and we were just OD consultants. We couldn't really boil the ocean, nor were we capable of boiling the ocean at that point of time. So we identified priorities and really helped the top team to go back and identify their own change champions and experts to really implement a lot of the recommendations that we had. And it went beyond just right sizing, but capacity development, and also bringing up to speed the entire manufacturing PPIC and the SAP implementation team as well from a people perspective. So as I said, the focus moved from optimization, from restructuring to optimization. And just the definition of optimization, we looked at utilization, efficiency, and effectiveness, and a synthesis of both soft and hard dimensions in this particular process. So if you look at how our tone in the consulting mandate changed, it was more from a tone to impose to a tone to enable when we moved from restructuring to optimization. A management driven to an inclusive and accommodative. And Jean, coming back to your point, I do agree that it has to be and in the middle rather than a complete shift. A focus on vertical to, as I said, horizontal, structure-based to pattern-based, right sizing to development in the organization. And change immediacy, because I didn't mention in the beginning that we were called in, the mandate was for 3 months, and that was the limiting and rigid consulting mandate that we signed up for. And what we actually ended up was that the real effect can only be visible. They can start to see effect after 1 year, even after we moved out with the help of other consultants and internal teams as they implemented our recommendations. So back to my systemic OD matrix, if you look at it, mandate was somewhere like this, the graph, the blue graph, which is accountability, alignment, task, structure. And what we eventually ended up doing was something like this, which touched different elements with a huge focus on development for task and development for accountability and people. And of course, it was not a complete shift, it was an and with capital A and D. So alignment and structure, accountability and task and structure remained. However, we could bring in the other elements as well. The reason I am particularly so excited about the systemic OD matrix was that, when I started OD consulting, I did not have this in my mind. I didn't know what this is. This was the process of when I was writing my book for 1.5 years that this idea really dawned in my mind. That unless we shift the focus to something more holistic and systemic, which I call the systemic OD matrix, as OD consultants, we have the danger of getting pulled into one box and losing sight of the other. So it might be an interesting thing for us to really experiment with it as OD consultants as we go forward with our assignments. Coming back to critical systems thinking, how does it all tie back? I'm just trying to keep an eye on the time. Yeah, maybe I'll speak for a few more minutes. To start off, it was critical awareness. Ulrich talks about challenging boundaries, cognitive, methodological, ethical, and all of these were touched in this particular mandate. And of course, intellectual conmen was that Eckhoff had called, and he specifically mentioned right sizing and downsizing and BPR, business process restructuring consultants. So I think there was somewhere that we were able to move out of that phase to something more enabling and human based in our work. Of pluralism, we had social, personal, and material appreciation. So it wasn't a complete move from the left to the right, but an and was there. And improvement, of course, remained at the center of everything that we're trying to do, and fixes that failed. So we didn't end up right sizing. We ended up creating a more capable organization with the help of requisite organization, bringing in a critical mindset to identify change and capacity building opportunities and building a more inclusive organization for potential teams. I'll quickly, this is the end of my case study, but I will quickly end up, I have a few more slides on a few consulting considerations, unless we have any burning questions right now about the case study.
Yeah, why don't we take a few questions, and I'm gonna go back and call on people as they put questions in the chat box, and their questions may have changed over time as well. So Paul Kelly, I think you had a question in the chat box. Do you still have a question? And you want to jump in here? You'll just have to unmute yourself.
Sorry for the delay there. Yeah, I think going back to the matrix you presented, you talked about the dangers of overfocus. I guess there are also dangers of not focusing at all on those areas, and have they been articulated?
Yes, so I would present this back Paul. That's a very important question that you talk about. So yeah, so I would actually look at the first line. If I say task, articulation, and definition take center stage, if I look at the alignment and task box, Paul, although I haven't called it out, but it would mean that if I'm not focusing on that, your role clarity or clear articulation or documentation might fall short. I think I would answer it that way. But I haven't really, in my book, when I wrote about the systemic OD matrix, talked about the dangers of not focusing. I mean, I think to me, it's an automatic no if those aspects are not addressed.
Thank you.
Paul, do you have a follow-on?
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Claudia, I think you were next with your question.
Hello, thank you. I enjoyed that very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claudia.
My question is that this is focused on a business and organization that's definable. Is your analytical framework scalable? Could you use what changes would be necessary to enable you to use this at a global level involving countries, for example, or even lower, interstate or international?
Right. Oh, that's a tough one, Claudia. I remember Stafford, who tried to restructure Chile, I think, using viable system model. And it was a very difficult and challenging job, and it was quote unquote an utter failure as documented in literature. So I think too much of bringing in a lot of structure at one go may be a very difficult process, Claudia. I don't have an immediate answer to that now. And you're right, it will be scalable when you're talking about an organization or a business. And if I look at, even at a global organization level, if I create a particular template, this can be replicated across different countries in the manufacturing plants, for example, because you need to be very flexible, because the human dimension in a plant in India would be very different from a human dimension in a steel plant in the United States, for example, right? But a template, if it's once created, it is created. For example, the systemic OD matrix will hold true anywhere in the world, I hope. Of course, you can challenge it, but I hope it's a more global framework. So from that perspective, I think it can be replicated when it comes to an organization. But if you look at a country level, to your particular point, I'm not sure. I'm not sure, and I don't know. It'll involve a bit more deliberation, I would think.
Thank you.
Okay, Marty, you're up next.
So I'm looking at your matrix again, and one of the things you note is the danger of the system slipping into chaos. So in my research, it's become really clear to me that if an organization is looking for transformative change, they have to move towards the edge of chaos, which is
right.
Of course, an incredibly uncomfortable place to be. So what do you do to help, particularly organizational leaders, but anyone really, develop comfort with that? Because it's really a critical piece, and otherwise we do the same old, same old.
Yeah, so, Marty, thanks for that. And I have been thinking about that particular point that, I mean, I myself talk about flexibility so much, but to what extent? So therefore, I've introduced the term authentic flexibility in my book. It's good to say that flexibility is important, empowerment is important, but I do feel that these aspects are also contextual. And I've always said that how can we create minimal change for maximal impact as an OD consultant? Because an OD consultant job is very difficult. If you want to bring about a big change, it's likely to be a failure. And in most cases, it is a failure. So my mantra always is small change with big impact. That in systems language, we say high leverage points, right? So yes, coming back to your particular point on an organization of chaos, people are now talking about, let's say, spaghetti organization or a clan rather than, specified structure. I think McKinsey talks about a tribe kind of a team when it comes to problem solving, right? But it also depends on a particular industry. It's great to talk about a tribe or a spaghetti organization for a consulting firm, and probably I would survive in it. But I don't know how a spaghetti organization would survive in a traditional manufacturing plant like an iron and steel company. So I do feel that it has to be really contextual, and we'll have to really understand in what situation are we talking about. However, coming back to my own profession, which is consulting, I think we have to live at the edge of chaos all the time, and therefore resilience is important. And specifically as a consultant, I can say that sometimes you feel that yes, your project is coming to a closure, and at the last point, the client will come back and say, "Oh, this is not what I asked for." Although they would be reviewing your work week on week, and they would ask you for a completely new thing without any extra additional payment. So I think a chaotic organization is fine, and I think that's how it is in our profession, but not in a traditional company. And what does your research say, Marty? I will be glad to hear that.
So first of all, a couple of things. One is I understand the desire for small change because it's more comfortable. However, there are times when that makes a lot of sense. But there are examples. We'll take Kodak, Eastman Kodak, for instance, which didn't make transformational change, and pretty much a dead company now. I mean, my son happens to be going to school in Rochester, New York, and it's had a huge impact on that community. And I would also take issue with what you said about leverage points, that Dana Meadows is really clear that the highest leverage you can get is, it's actually, I may not get the really top level one, but she talks about paradigm change.
Right.
And that's the kind of change I'm talking about. I'm more interested in transformational change. And I also am not usually working with businesses. I'm working with communities and agencies and nonprofits around social issues. But I do think that businesses need to learn this as well, that if you're only making the small changes, you're not really changing your thinking. And changing your thinking is what really needs to happen if you want transformational change. So for me, in the work I would do, I would be, not in a direct way, but I would be introducing a systems approach and systems thinking to try and help them get to that level of thinking. I mean, and in the other piece of my research that backs this up is through constructive developmental theory, Robert Keegan's work, that there are 5 levels of human consciousness. The last 3 are adult levels, and the top one is the level of thinking and consciousness we need to be in order to address the issues we're dealing with now, the complexity of the issues. And unfortunately, his data says that it's less than 1% of the adult population is there, which is terribly distressing. So that, for me, I feel that as a consultant, coming in and helping them develop their thinking in a way that they don't need to hire me anymore is the best thing I can do for them. And so that's where I'm coming from when I talk about moving towards the edge of chaos. That you're not going into chaos, you're there where it's essentially, creative destruction. You're sort of dismantling the old in order to create a new, but you have to have that time where it's really uncomfortable, and a lot of organizations just will not go there. So that's that was my thinking behind the question.
Sure.
then
Thank you. Thank you, Marty.
Marty, I think you had another question at the very end. Do you want to go ahead and ask that now since?
Oh, sure. Which is, so one of the things that you probably know, as I know, it's always hard as an OD consultant to really know, did this really work? Did I really, so I'm just curious if you had built into your project any way of measuring the success, and if so, what that was. I know it's often hard to build that in, but I'm just curious if you were able to do that.
Yeah, so Marty, the closest we went to that was the action planning workshop that I talked about, because there were a host of recommendations. So the action planning really came out, the outcome of that was in a way a framework for measuring success. So it identified the 10 to 15 top priorities that they had to deliver at a granular level. At what time span they had to deliver the same. Third, who was responsible? And it wasn't by hierarchy. In some cases, it was a department head. In some cases, it might be someone junior. And finally, what kind of resources and dependencies they had in delivering that. So a 1-year roadmap was drawn out, and that was championed by not even by the CEO, but the promoter himself of the company, right? So that was the measure of some measure of success that we had brought in. Yeah, measure of tracking, I would say, rather than measure of success.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Thank
Sure.
you. Jean Bellinger, you're up next.
Yeah, if you go back a few slides.
Okay.
To the let's see. Show me the thing on the side and I'll tell you which one.
Oh, on the side note?
Show me the list of slides.
Okay.
Up, keep going up.
I think yours was on the dashboard, wasn't it? That one?
Right there, that one.
Yep.
Okay.
Is that different than a standard SWOT analysis, or is it essentially that with the labels slightly different?
Did you say SWOT analysis?
Yes. Strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Yeah, no, it's not a SWOT analysis, Gene, because there was no external benchmark used here. It was totally an internal study.
Oh, okay.
And this was done, yeah, purely from qualitative interviews of the unique role holders. So this is not a SWOT analysis.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Okay, thanks. Peter Tuttingham, I think you are on the list next, and maybe you can give your analogy of spaghetti. That's been a good, interesting discussion.
Oh, I was just querying, spaghetti management and having a bit of fun. I mean, I was just trying to imagine what spaghetti management was like, really. And then,
yeah,
I mean, it comes in very straight-minded boxes, Yeah,
but before that, you had a question about some references.
Oh, Rajneesh, I just wondered, I was just curious about your relationship with the Brunel or BIOS, because the terms you were using there on stratified systems theory were sort of ones that were created by Julian Stamp. I was just wondering.
Yes, it's exactly Julian Stamp's methodology, the whole framework, and we were licensed to use the levels of work framework by Julian Stamp for stratified systems theory.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. You're welcome.
Great, thanks. Elena, you're next, and if I've missed anybody, please, I'll give you time after Elena's question.
I don't actually have a question, but I feel I must challenge the assertion that Stafford's work in Chile for Salvador Allende was a failure. It didn't work because of the CIA-sponsored coup against Allende, and it was working, reasonably well up to then in terms of the project progress. The other thing I would like to challenge is it was never supposed to be running the whole country. What it was supposed to be doing was running the state-run industries and having them work together in a synergistic fashion. And to a very small extent, also helping the government inform itself about what was happening with the citizens. So it really is, if you look at Eden Medina's Cybernetic Revolutionaries, it gives a much more complete story than the, frankly, CIA-sponsored meme that it was a failure and that it couldn't possibly have happened because they didn't have big enough computers.
And
Thanks, Elena.
I'd like to add, Elena worked directly with Stafford Beer at that time, correct, Elena?
Not at that time, later.
Okay.
Excellent.
All
So
right.
that's my ignorance, Elena. Apologies for that. But great to hear from you, and thanks for the feedback.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
Well, this is Mark. Can you hear me?
Oh, hey, Mark. I saw you had put a note. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, mine's kind of a meta question, and if you take it in the wrong sense, and I had to think about different ways to say it, or at least to put it out there, you could take it as aggressive or negative, and I don't really mean it that way at all. I mean, if we try to be systems thinkers about the whole idea of consulting, I think it's a very interesting thing to explore. I mean, I think in the 50s, the naivete of the 50s, consulting made a huge amount of sense. In the world of Greta today, I'm just not sure. I mean, as a systemist, I can't imagine consulting being relevant because it doesn't scale. Not because everything you say, I agree with. We have a very similar background, and I've been a consultant, but more importantly, I've hired a lot of consultants for 20 years, and I just don't think that it's relevant to the future of the world. And the nasty part, the way it first occurred to me, was to characterize it as colonialist, but I realized we didn't have enough time for me to put that back into context. So it really is just a matter of, I mean, there's some of that, but I don't think that's the relevant point. The point is you can't create enough consultants that match enough context for it ever to do anything, in the real world, unless you believe that it's a highly leveraged thing, that one consultant acting in one country will suddenly tip the whole thing, which I don't think the dynamics are there for that. So that's, to me, it's not, I don't have any criticism or comments or questions about anything you said. I agree with all of it. My question is, and?
What's next? Well, and I think you bring up a good point, Mark, about the typical consultant not being relevant. And we all know.
I'm saying, just to be clear, I'm not saying the typical. I'm saying the best possible consultant. And I'd put, this presentation and the knowledge in it right up there with the best possible. So I want to be clear. I'm saying if you had the best possible consultants in the world and you made them as fast as you could make them and you distributed them across the world, is there any chance that it would be relevant other than just the consultants themselves?
Well, I think not if they're working in a vacuum, a funnel, a silo. But if they're not.
No, I'm talking about any situation you can actually imagine in the real world. I'm not trying to. I'm really asking a very serious question.
I know you are. I appreciate it. Okay, Rajneesh.
Don't have an answer for that, Mark. And I am excited by your question and also worried for my own job to stay on the job.
I mean, that worried for our own job.
Yeah,
worried for our own job is the distraction. We have to be careful about that. Because in a way, Akoff's wonderful statement about doing the wrong thing righter, just changed my life. Just that one statement.
I'm glad you brought this up, because in my book, I talk about holistic flexibility, which is a framework for critical systems thinking consultants I've introduced. And I've said that we have, as CST consultants, we need to focus on responsible outcomes. And, I emphasize a lot on responsible outcomes, which is about, ability to build solutions which are sustainable. And can a consultant really take the role of a catalyst or an enabler, not somebody who has quote unquote expert knowledge from outside and come and solve a problem, because that clearly does not happen. And today, I mean, you're right, Mark. In whichever organizations we go to, some of our clients have access to better best practices than we do, right? I mean, knowledge is infinite, and everyone has access to that. And seriously, how does a consultant, the role of the consultant is really an enabler to bring all the best practices together to kickstart change.
So
But
can I throw one other thing in there while you're, this guy, very few normal consultants in the world of systems thinking know about, who really was behind the unionization of Southeastern United States and the entire civil rights movement. And it's a guy named Miles Horton. And, you know, there are PBS documentaries on him. There are great books and stuff, but it's just his world and our world doesn't intersect, which is really too bad, because he's the most impactful person probably ever in the United States. I mean, you could go back to George Washington or something, but I mean, and here's his feeling about experts, and he's eloquent in it himself. You know, you can find stuff online. But basically, from 1929 until he died in, I don't know, late 80s or something, he didn't let an expert on the property, not because he didn't value expertise, but because expertise destroyed the learning of the people who were there and who ultimately went out and made huge changes in the world. So I have multiple reasons, not just the one of mathematics, you know, scalability. I have multiple concerns with the concept, the construct of consultancy. To me, we are bad parents. We're parents who know what our children should do, and so we think that we should tell them what they should do. And a parent knowing what the child should do, you know, should be locked up. The grandparent sometimes has realized that you need indirect methods. you know. So I don't know. I don't want to beat this any further, but I think it is the ethical question for all consultants that never gets asked or seldom gets asked. You know, you don't typically ask it till you don't need the money of consulting anymore.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's the answer, Mark. Thanks for that. In fact, my recent interest now is that so much has been written about consulting, but it's always from a consultant's point of view. Very little has been written from the client's point of view. So that's something I've recently started exploring, and I talk a bit about it in my next paper, which is hopefully coming out next year as well. So thanks for bringing that up.
I just want to say this last thing. It's not the client and the consultant. They both, in their own ways, can benefit. I'm talking about, is it scalable? Does it work in the world, the world Greta cares about? I'm done.
Mark,
thank you.
May I say something?
Of course.
Yes, Claudia.
That's not my meeting.
I have a question about exactly what it is you are talking about. Is what scalable? Is consulting scalable?
Yeah,
He's
exactly.
talking about the tools of consulting. What we've been talking about for the past is the tools of consulting, not consulting the field. If you're saying the cults of consulting the field is not scalable, it's not irrelevant, it's not a precise statement of a problem, because you have to.
No, I'm saying the idea that these tools in sets that can be used and implemented, you know, where people don't know them. Do you think that the agent, the conceptual and actual agent of consultancy, let's just assume there's truth in every one of the tools. I do. I think there's huge truth in every tool you discussed. That's not my issue. My issue is the idea of getting it out there by a certain real number of consultants in a certain real number of situations. I'm just saying the math doesn't work. That's all I'm saying.
I still don't have a clear idea of what.
How many consultants can you make for every problem that really is essential for the well-being of humanity and for the ecological, you know, survival of the planet? How many consultants do you need? That's the way to make it legitimate. Huh?
You're saying the field is not legitimate.
I know, I'm asking a question. I'm just asking a mathematical question.
Does your question relate to the legitimacy of the field?
It relates to the reality of the possibility that the field can have the effect it imagines it could have.
So you're saying the responsibility of the field is world change, and that their ability to affect a specific situation.
No. The responsibility of the field is for its own survival. That's clear. I'm saying what I care about at my age, and that's why I keep saying Greta, is the future of the planet. I'm suggesting that one should at least spend some time asking whether the construct, the construction of consultancy could actually ever deal with the big problems we have, or is it another self-serving, navel-gazing approach that really bright people like all of us? I'm guilty. I am a consultant. Okay, I just don't think that it works for the things I care about. That's all.
So we need to wind this down, and I want Rajneesh to have a time to summarize at the end. So Rajneesh, will you
Can I just say one thing, which is, Mark, when you're talking about consultants who create dependency, meaning they're the ones who come in and solve the problems and the clients rely on them, and in my book, that's both ineffective and unethical.
Right.
So
no, I'm with you. I'm with you on that.
I think that this conversation.
Can I just finish?
Yeah.
So a consultant that is doing a good job and is worthwhile having around is one that helps the clients figure out how to solve their own problems so they don't need a consultant anymore. So that's just
how do you create enough of those? I couldn't agree more. How do you create enough? In other words, can the math ever work?
One at a time. Just one at a time. So, Jean, were you going to ask a question real quick? You popped up. You're muted, though.
No, I'm trying to schedule a discussion with Mark sometime in the future.
Got it. Okay, so Rajneesh, will you summarize and let's
Sure. Yeah. Well, I don't have an answer to the last 5 minutes discussion because I think it merits more discussion and not an answer. But all I can say is, as Marty really rightly summarized in a way, is the job of a consultant is to enable capability to the clients so that they can solve their own problems in the long run. I think the other very important role of a consultant is being able to show the problem in a different light to a client, because there's the old adage of the frog in the well, right? So you are part of the system, therefore you don't recognize the system. I think that's a huge role that I see that a consultant playing, and I can speak a lot from my own experience about how that can bring value to a client. Yeah, I think that's about it. I had more slides on consulting considerations, but I think we are in a healthy state to close the discussion right now. And just a slide on my latest book on systems thinking for management consultants, available online if any of you are interested. And thank you all very much for your precious time and the really exciting discussions. That's the most important part.
Thank you, Rajneesh. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Is this goodbye? Leave me?
Yes, it's goodbye. Thank you, Claudia, for joining.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Thanks.